Hi, my name is Seth Cohen, and I'm the Chief Impact Officer of Forbes. I'm here in New York City at NASDAQ Market Site with Professor David Miller on the faculty of Princeton University and the founder of the Faith and Work Initiative. David, thanks for joining us today.
It's a delight to be here. Thanks, Seth.
So, David, you have a very unique set of skills. People describe you as bilingual because you speak both business and faith, and you're bringing that insight to the work you do at Princeton. Tell me what the initiative you lead is and why it was important to you to create it.
Yeah, so we all have a story, and briefly, I come out of the corporate world. So I was a former senior executive, I was an investment banker, I was in tech before that as well, partner in a private bank. So I understand the ethical issues that people face, and they're big and they're hard, where there's not always a clear right and wrong. So I became intrigued with how people's value system, whatever their values, they come from something, and for many people it's their faith tradition, whatever it is. And I became intrigued, what role might that play, could that play, does that play, or not? And that sort of led to this figuring out that. So for the past 20 years or so, I've been thinking about this question: what does one's Sabbath, however we define that, have to do with their Monday?
Was there a moment in your professional career where this became very clear to you that this was work you wanted to do? In other words, being focused on ethics sometimes strikes me as, was there a moment where it was crystal clear to you that there was a need for this kind of dialogue, both in the academy and in the workforce?
I don't know if there's a moment, but there are a couple of experiences. One quick story. I remember when I was running one of the big divisions for HSBC, and one of our top revenue clients we suspected they were doing some unethical, if not illegal things. What do you do? If we fired and resigned the relationship, I don't make my numbers. But on the surface, it looked perfectly fine. They ticked all the compliance boxes. I go to my boss and I say, what do we do? And he said, what do you think you should do? You're the guy running the division. And I said, I think we need to exit the client. It's too risky. We don't want to be affiliated with them. And he said, do it. But I said, understand, we're not going to make our numbers. He said, I got your back. Yeah. That made me really proud. Do
you feel...
Not of me, but of the organization, of this, my boss.
And where you worked and
said,
who they were.
This place, we're trying to play by the rules.
Now, I would imagine a lot of people listening into this are thinking to themselves, that issue comes up almost every day in my work on some level. Yeah. Is this something that's happening more? Is this issue of ethics and understanding it something that's developing more because of the times we're in, or have you seen any trends or trend lines that cause into question the urgency of the work you're doing?
Yeah. I think it's more in the public domain. People are talking about it more, and at a personal level. I mean, I know when I graduated from college, I wasn't thinking about ethics. I was just trying to go out and do well at my job and succeed and go forward in a career. I look at my students at Princeton today, and almost to a person, it doesn't matter what country they're from, what background, they want to work for socially responsible companies. They want to make the world a better place somehow. And for many, they're willing to draw on their faith tradition, again, whatever it might be, as their North Star, or at least one of the resources or toolkits.
So we're hearing this a lot in lots of reports, and we were talking about this before we got on set, that there's a trend of individuals saying that they're nuns, N-O-N-E-S, in faith. Right. But I also think, from what you just said, there's a lot of people that are bringing their faith and their beliefs into the classroom, into the workplace. So what are we getting wrong? If people are saying that they're nuns, but on the other hand, they are bringing in faith beliefs into their work, what's the disconnect?
Well, often pollsters, whom I highly respect, get it wrong. They're asking the wrong questions. And if you don't ask the right question, you don't find the answer you're really looking for. They often measure religiosity. First of all, what is religiosity? Should we even be measuring that? And they measure it by how many people attend or a member of a house of worship. That's not the right way to measure it. If you ask questions about meaning, purpose, is there something bigger than me? Do I believe in God or gods? Or something in the universe that's bigger than me? Almost all of them will say yes, even the so-called NONEs. What I think the big issue is, people don't want to be affiliated. The institutional life has turned them off. And we could read the Edelman Trust Barometer and all. Most of the big institutions, including academia, but certainly the religious world, they have suffered a great crisis of confidence and trust.
So what's the role, before we get into the workplace itself, what's the role of the academy at Princeton, particularly for teaching these students maybe the ways to think about these ethical questions or these faith-related elements of ethical exploration.
Yeah.
Like, what's the role of the academy, particularly when the academy itself seems to be under attack sometimes?
Well, actually, it's an emerging space, and a lot of universities and colleges just don't want to touch it. They think anything to do with religion, qua religion, it's too hot. They don't want to touch it. They're afraid of being sued or offending someone. And I think there's a way, like with any controversial subject, to embrace it with intellectual honesty, with respect, and that's what I try to do. In the first class, I set up with the ground rules and said, if you're not comfortable with discomfort, then maybe you shouldn't be in this class. Now, everything we're going to do is respectful, but there might be disagreements, and that's okay. And we need to learn and practice it when we're in college and university, because you don't often get many practice shots when you're in the corporate world.
Well, it seems like you're giving a good advice on the university environment generally, which should be more about the opening of minds than necessarily of the keeping of closing of minds. In the workforce, though, the metrics are a little bit different. You alluded to before, the numbers really matter, profit margins really matter. So what's the place for this kind of faith and ethical exploration in that environment here in 2025?
Yeah. So first of all, it's absolutely right that the corporate world, the marketplace, business, however we define it, whether it's high tech or old industries, that of course they need acceptable, satisfactory profits. I want them to be profitable, just like Forbes and NASDAQ. I mean, that's a great idea. How one does that is the big question, and that's what the students are interested in, and that's what I am. What does professional responsibility look like? Ethics to me is not about law and compliance. They're necessary, but not sufficient. Ethics to me is about character and culture. Character and culture, which then begs the question, what shapes your character? What shapes your culture? Well, it could be your mom, your grandma, it could be your aunt, it could be the rabbi, a coach, it could be any figure, or usually a compendium of figures. They shape and mold you to who you're going to become. That's the sort of questions that those are the sort of questions we explore. In the corporate world, if it's not billed as religiosity, if it's billed as, would you rather your people be more ethical or less ethical, yes or no? What are they going to say? Well, most companies hopefully will say, of course we would. Do you want people to have a heightened sense of professional responsibility and be proud to be an engineer, or be proud even to be a data entry clerk, whatever? Of course they do. So then you need to create the culture for people to flourish and move towards the good as opposed to move towards the bad or the indifferent, which is sometimes even worse.
So I often say that how you choose visibly or legibly to do something really indicates to lots of people how you choose to do everything. And it really feels like that's similar in terms of your ethical choices and your, if you bring your faith as a key indicator or a key aspect of how you choose to do things, then it does tend to inform people that it's how you're choosing how to do everything. Is that a good thing or a bad thing, I guess?
Well, so I tend to advocate sort of a low-key approach to these things as opposed to wear it in your sleeve with bumper stickers on your forehead, you know, hunk if you believe this or love that. The advice I give different CEOs and C-suite executives on this question is do it thoughtfully. If we look back, when have corporations made big societal statements? Go back several decades. I'm a bit of a corporate history junkie. So if we go back to the 60s, it was race friendly, sort of the civil rights movement, and sort of having new alertness to people you never would have thought, well, a black person can't be a CEO. Well, of course they can. Well, then the corporate world led in sort of female friendly, well, of course females could be a CEO. And by the way, they ought to be paid the same amount too. Then we kind of get a little bit later, and it's family-friendly policies, sort of daycare and healthcare and maternity leave and paternity leave. So the corporate world has often led the way, and the government has lagged in some of these social, not always, but many of these social growth opportunities. And then I think we're emerging in an area now of faith-friendliness. And I want to make sure I'm not saying faith.
Say it again,
Faith-friendly. Faith-friendly, not faith-based. Faith-friendly, which says everyone has an equal seat at the table. I don't care if you're a Hindu, a Buddhist, a Sikh, Muslim, Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, whatever, Zoroastrian, A to Z, Amish to Zoroastrian, that everyone has an equal seat at the table. So if you have certain religious practices or observances, they should at least just be respected. And in fact, it's almost exactly 60 years ago when the 1964 Civil Rights Act was passed, and Title VII of it has to do with discrimination in the workplace, not based on, amongst other things, religion, race, sex, and religion. A lot of general counsels, unfortunately, haven't studied that, and they think that separation of church and state means we can't have faith at work. That's just factually wrong as a point of law.
So what are some common, I'm sure there's some people watching this saying, well, it would be great if I could bring my whole self to work, including my faith self, but I'm afraid of stepping in to maybe a hole or making some mistakes or offending others. What are some common rules of the road or some advice you have for people that want to bring their faith into the workplace in a respectful way for their colleagues?
So I wrote a book several years ago called God at Work, and came up with a typology of 4 different ways that people manifest or bring, quote unquote, bring their faith. I mean, it's not like it's in a suitcase, so it's who you are. For many people, it just gives them a sense of meaning and purpose, a sense of dedication, a sense of loyalty. For others, they might feel compelled to have some visual garb or things like that, or even to talk about their faith. To me, the fundamental ground rule is respect. And close to that is not standing in judgment of others. So let's say your faith tradition teaches you something that others don't. Let's say you're anti-LGBTQ. Well, sorry, you're not going to be allowed to behave that way. In fact, a phrase I coined is, if you want to boil it all down, if you're worried about the downside, and there are, because people could abuse it, they could be offensive, they could be obnoxious to other people, they could harass other people, so those are the dark sides to this. But the ground rule is behavior trumps belief.
Behavior trumps belief.
So I don't care what you believe. Moon's made of cheese, fine. Green cheese, fine. But if the moon tells you to do something that's against our core values as a company, or against the laws of our state, or the laws of the land, or what we stand for, sorry, it will not be accepted. So you avoid someone wanting to do something that's offensive or hard.
So you're okay to hold your belief, but you should check your behavior, particularly within the norms and the expectations of the work environment, specifically and generally.
Well, I mean, think about it. You know, I'm a Yankees fan, but if I'm in Boston, I'm not going to talk about the Red Sox. I mean, use little common sense.
That's right. I one time wore a Braves jersey to a Philadelphia Phillies game. I won't make that mistake again.
You're a brave man.
So I understand, literally, pun intended. I know, David, you have a new book coming out this fall called The 5 Elements of Ethical Thinking. Tell me about what this book is going to be and why this prompted you to think about this.
So I teach a class at Princeton for undergraduates, just for juniors and seniors, and it's always oversubscribed. I mean, I never would have taken the class when I was their age, but it's a sign of the times. They're interested in intelligent, thoughtful, respectful conversations about faith, work, ethics, professional responsibility, as long as they feel they're not being sold a bill of goods, if there's a certain authenticity, and that everyone has an equal faith-friendly treatment. The students, I had a very boring academic title for it, something like theology and professional responsibility and ethics. They nicknamed it Succeeding Without Selling Your Soul. Succeeding
without selling your soul. I love it.
So that's the subtitle to the book, actually. And essentially, I've stepped back and over years of thinking about this both as a practitioner and now as a scholar, that there's 5 essential questions we need to think about when thinking about ethics and professional responsibility. So this book, essentially, surprise, surprise, will have 5 chapters, each going through those 5 different questions.
So, David, I have just a few more questions, but one is we actually first met through the important work being done by the Faith and Media Initiative that was sparked by some work and studying by the Radiant Foundation, Fetzer Institute, and Wayfarer and others. And that's how we got to know each other. It does seem like we're in this moment of faith-forward opportunities. But is there something in particular that we should be wary of or watching in this field that perhaps is, those of us who are not as knowledgeable as perhaps you and I may be on some of this work, that we should be watching out for?
Yeah. Before I answer that, it's like a PS to the earlier thing about the book. The book is aimed at practitioners in the marketplace and also for students in the college arena. So hopefully there'll be practical tips and ideas, so it's not just an academic treatise on philosophical ethics and theological ethics. It's meant to be real for people in the real world who operate in the ethical gray zone. And what do you do when there's not a good answer, no matter how experienced and smart and big your heart is? So that's where we're hoping to do that. This moment we're in now, I think we are easing into or stumbling into a pivotal moment for religion. We'll recall, was it 1964, Time magazine, Is God Dead, whatever the title was. Well, I think God's doing just fine, thank you. However one understands that. There is a yearning for something more than more toys, more than more objects in our life. These things there's a saying in many traditions about having a God-sized hole in our heart. Now, it's not everyone's cup of tea, I get that. And by the way, I would never argue that you have to be faith-oriented to be ethical. Some of the most ethical people I've ever met are atheists or agnostics. For those who do have a faith tradition, it gives you something to hold on to when times are tough. It gives you have this sense, it's bigger than me. I'm going to be all right. I'm going to come out of this okay. There's sort of an eternal hope that you have that comes from a robust faith tradition. I think we will find, and it may not be measured the old ways, going back to how do surveys and pollsters measure these things. It may not be of how many seats or buns in the pews, as sometimes people say, or other things. It may be measured very differently. I think something is afoot. I'm not one of these prognosticators that will go further than that, but I think something's afoot, and it certainly will surprise many people. I think the growth of interest in these questions we're talking about.
David, you've spent time going back and forth between the business world and the academic world. My former colleague Adam Simon calls this sector swapping or sector switching. And I think it sounds like it's given you a great amount of insight. What is so valuable about being able to be someone who boundary spans between the business world and the academic world? Why is that so important?
Well, many of the companies that will engage me to walk alongside them, sometimes it's just in a private leadership advisory role, because the aphorism is true. It is lonely at the top. You can't tell your board members. You may not want to bring it home to tell your spouse, and you don't trust your lieutenant because he wants your job. So someone's just talking freely without judgment, and me listening and asking hopefully some good questions. The other perspective it gives is in fact, one of my clients, Deloitte, used to talk about, they said the reason we really want to work with you is because A, you understand our world, you come from it, and B, what's best practice? What's going on that we don't see? Because we've got our blinders on and we do business as usual. So they found it really helpful. And sometimes I couldn't name the company for confidentiality reasons, but company A or company B is doing this. You might try that idea. And that was so helpful to them.
I think that you're pointing out something really important, which is the bridge between lived experience and learned experience in the academy, and understanding both of those have a value in the way we make choices about the business we build and the business we do.
Exactly.
Great. David, well, I really appreciate it. And I've been joined today at NASDAQ Market Site with David Miller, part of the faculty of Princeton University and the founder of the Faith and Work Initiative. Thanks, David.
Hey, thank you. Great to be with you, Seth.